They called themselves leaders, but Mussolini and Hitler were brothers in terror who rewrote history in blood. April 28, 1945, a gas station in a small Italian village. The man who once commanded millions now hangs upside down like a slaughtered animal. His mistress dangles beside him. The crowd doesn't just watch, they spit, kick, and mutilate the corpses. This is how Benito Mussolini's 21-year reign of terror ended. And what happened in those final 48 hours is more shocking than any Hollywood revenge film could ever imagine. Welcome to Darkroom Archive, where we uncover the brutal truths history tried to bury. If you're fascinated by the darkest moments that shaped our world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's rewind to April 25, 1945. 3 days before that gas station, Mussolini sits in his office in Milan, and the walls are literally closing in. The Allies are pushing north. Partisan resistance fighters control the streets. His German allies, the ones who propped him up after his own people, overthrew him 2 years earlier, are fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The leader, the man who promised to rebuild the Roman Empire, is now just a desperate dictator with nowhere to run. Here's something most people don't know. Mussolini actually tried to negotiate with the partisans. Can you imagine? The same man who executed thousands of political opponents, who sent Italian Jews to death camps, who bombed Ethiopian civilians with chemical weapons. This man thought he could cut a deal. The partisans' response: unconditional surrender or death. Mussolini chose door number 3, escape. On April 25th, at around 8 p.m., Mussolini and his mistress Clara Petacci fled Milan in a convoy of vehicles. His plan was simple: get to Switzerland, disappear, maybe write his memoirs from a cozy alpine chalet. But here's where it gets interesting. Mussolini didn't trust anyone anymore. He traveled with minimal guards, wore a German military overcoat to blend in, and carried documents that would allegedly guarantee his safe passage. But before we get to what happened next, you need to understand who Clara Petacci was, because her story is somehow both a tragic romance and a cautionary tale about loving a monster. Clara Petacci was 28 years younger than Mussolini. She first met him when she was just 24, already married to an Italian Air Force officer. By all accounts, she became completely obsessed with Il Ducs. She would send him letters, show up at events, and eventually she became his official mistress. Now, here's the thing that makes this story even more twisted. Clara had everything: wealth, status, connections. She could have left Italy any time during those final days. Her family begged her to flee. The Germans offered her safe passage. She refused every single opportunity to save herself. Why? Because she believed she was the great love of Mussolini's life. She thought their relationship was some kind of epic romance like Antony and Cleopatra or Romeo and Juliet. The reality: Mussolini had multiple mistresses. Clara was just the most devoted one, and that devotion would cost her everything. On April 27th, as their convoy headed toward the Swiss border, Clara sat beside Mussolini in one of the vehicles, probably still believing they'd make it to safety, start a new life, and live happily ever after. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, she'd be hanging upside down at that gas station. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because first, they had to get caught. April 27th, around 7 a.m. The convoy reaches a partisan checkpoint near the town of Untold on Lake Como. This is literally kilometers from the Swiss border. Mussolini can probably see the mountains where freedom waits. The partisan commander, a guy named Pierluigi Bellini del Stel, remember, that name stops the convoy. He's looking for fascists trying to escape with stolen gold and cash. And oh boy, does he hit the jackpot. Here's where Mussolini made his fatal mistake. Instead of trying to negotiate or fight, he tried to hide. He put on German military goggles and a helmet, hunched down in the back of a truck, and hoped the partisans wouldn't recognize him. But there was one problem. Benito Mussolini had one of the most recognizable faces in the world. He'd been on every newspaper, every propaganda poster, every newsreel for 2 decades. Trying to hide that face with goggles and a helmet was like trying to disguise Elvis with a fake mustache. One of the partisans, Giuseppe Negri, recognized him immediately. He walked up to the truck, looked Mussolini dead in the eye, and said, "Cavaliere, Benito Mussolini." And Mussolini, he just pushed his goggles up and replied, "Yes, I am Mussolini. No fight, No dramatic last stand, just resignation. But here's the kicker: Clara Petacci wasn't even supposed to be captured. She was in a different vehicle, had false papers, and could have easily slipped through. But when she heard Mussolini had been arrested, she ran to him, screaming, "I want to be with him. You can't separate us." The partisans tried to explain that she was free to go. She refused. She literally chose to stay with Mussolini, knowing exactly what that meant. That's not romance, that's tragedy. The partisans locked them in a farmhouse in the village of Giulino di Mest, and there, Mussolini spent his last night on earth. Did he think about the thousands he'd killed? The wars he'd started? The empire he'd destroyed? We'll never know. Because the next day, everything ended. April 28, 1945. Around 4 p.m., partisan firing squad arrives at the farmhouse. The commander is Walter Audizio, codenamed Colonel Valerio. His orders come directly from the National Liberation Committee. Execute Mussolini and Petacci. No trial, no mercy, just justice. They load Mussolini and Clara into a car and drive to a nearby villa. On the way, Clara is crying, begging for Mussolini's life. Mussolini. He's silent. Witnesses say he looked almost relieved that it was finally over. They stop at the Villa Belmonte, near the village gate. Audizio orders them out of the car. He reads the death sentence, execution by the Italian people for crimes against the nation. Now, here's where accounts differ. Some witnesses say Mussolini opened his coat and shouted, "Shoot me in the chest." Others say he was silent, broken, ready to die. Clara threw herself in front of him, screaming, "No, you can't. He's everything to me." Audizio pushed her aside. He raised his gun and it jammed. Think about that. The most important execution in Italian history. And the gun doesn't work. Audizio grabbed another weapon from a colleague and fired. Clara died first, shot through the chest. Then Mussolini, hit by multiple bullets. The whole thing took less than a minute. But the brutality didn't end there. Not even close. Because what happened next is what makes this story truly unforgettable. Here's what they don't teach you in history class. After the execution, the bodies were thrown into a moving van and driven to Milan. They were dumped in Piazzale Loreto, the same square where months earlier the fascists had executed 15 partisans and displayed their bodies as a warning. Now it was payback time. A crowd gathered, hundreds, then thousands of Italians who had suffered under Mussolini's regime. They didn't just look at the bodies, they attacked them. They kicked, spat, urinated on them. Someone shot Mussolini's corpse 5 more times, once for each year of Italy's participation in World War II. Then someone had an idea. String them up using meat hooks from a nearby gas station. They hung Mussolini, Petacci, and several other executed fascist officials upside down from a metal beam. The crowd went wild. They threw stones, garbage, anything they could find. Someone bashed Mussolini's face with a club, completely disfiguring him. A woman fired 5 shots into his body and screamed, "5 shots from my 5 assassinated sons." The crowd cheered. This went on for hours. American troops eventually arrived and had to form a protective cordon around the bodies, not to honor them, but to prevent the crowd from tearing them to pieces completely. By the end of that day, photographs of Mussolini hanging upside down had spread across the world. Winston Churchill saw them and reportedly felt sick, not out of sympathy for Mussolini, but because he thought the execution without trial set a dangerous precedent. The images became instantly iconic. They appeared on the front pages of newspapers everywhere, from New York to Moscow. For millions of people, those photographs represented the end of fascism in Europe. But here's something most people don't realize. Hitler saw those photographs too. When Hitler learned about how was captured, executed, and then hung upside down, it deeply shocked and frightened him. Some historians believe this is one of the reasons Hitler insisted on having his body burned after his suicide 2 days later. He was absolutely determined not to end up like Mussolini. So, in a twisted way, Mussolini's brutal end directly influenced how World War II's other infamous dictator chose to die. As for Clara Petacci, her story adds another layer of tragedy. Her family spent years trying to rehabilitate her image, claiming she was a victim of love, caught in circumstances beyond her control. But historians have uncovered a darker truth. Clara wasn't just a mistress. She actively participated in the regime, influenced appointments, and lived off wealth confiscated from Jewish families. Her devotion to Mussolini wasn't innocent romance, it was complicity. So what can we learn from the brutal execution of Benito Mussolini? First, dictators who promise greatness almost always deliver destruction. Mussolini came to power promising to make Italy great again, to rebuild the Roman Empire, to restore national pride. Instead, he led his country into a catastrophic war, destroyed its economy, and got hundreds of thousands of Italians killed. Second, the people you oppress never forget. Mussolini thought he could rule through fear and violence. In the end, that same violence came back to consume him quite literally. And third, there's Clara Petacci's story. It's a reminder that loving someone doesn't mean supporting everything they do. Clara had multiple chances to save herself, to distance herself from Mussolini's crimes. She chose complicity every single time, and that choice cost her life. The images of Mussolini hanging upside down at that gas station remain some of the most powerful photographs of the 20th century. They remind us that no dictator, no matter how powerful they seem, is invincible. They all fall eventually. And when they do, history judges them mercilessly. If you found this story as shocking as I did, smash that like button and subscribe to Darkroom Archive. I post new stories every week, and each one reveals something even more unbelievable than the last. Comment below which topic you want next, and I'll see you in the next video.